Welcome back to another episode of On Air with Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer. This is episode 23, Britain Regains America. And we're kind of kicking things off today with that famous quote, "Give me control of a nation's money supply and I care not who makes its laws." Now, it's widely, or that quote's widely linked to Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was obviously the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty. But to be clear, there's no solid proof that he actually said it, but anyone running a Google search will find that it's attributed to him. So it still makes for a powerful opener. Great to be back with you, Phoenician Hunter.
Hello, good morning. Summer's arrived.
Summer in Europe has arrived.
You feel it? I feel it.
The heat wave is
Underway.
well and truly here. Look, let's just jump straight into it if we can. But before I do, I just wanted to remind our listeners that these podcasts use your in-depth research and subsequent Substack articles as the foundation for our on-air discussions. And as always, people can simply head to phoenicianhunter.substack.com and literally be awestruck at the level of research and detail that you've put into these articles. I can absolutely guarantee that you won't be disappointed. Alrighty, so today's article that you've written centres around central banking, and I think this is going to be an issue that a lot of people will be interested in. So from the birth of America through to the creation of what we now know today as the Federal Reserve, and perhaps more on the Federal Reserve later as we progress through this chat. Okay, so following the period, I guess, when America was founded in 1776, and I use that word founded intentionally, and we can talk about that later as well. And this is after George Washington's presidency ended in 1801. You had President Thomas Jefferson, who, mind you, was also responsible for writing the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. He gave a stern warning to the American people. And he said, quote, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies."
Yeah, I intentionally put that in the article to sort of start off. That quote just proves that Thomas Jefferson really knew what the dangers were for the new nation. It's true then as it is today, and nothing's changed. The War of Independence has always fascinated me, and anyone who studies those events closely will notice that, there's a lot more going on with that event before, during, and after than what, the standard historians tell us. So,
Sure.
one crucial point that most people miss is that the American colonies were at war with Britain again only 19 years after the War of Independence. So to me, if you've really gained independence, why are you going to war with that same enemy only 19 years later? Resembles a bit the world wars between one and two. I think there was like a 20-year gap or something there as well. So, a lot of people look at that event and say, well, two really is a continuation of one. And I think it's the same case here. It never really ended. America didn't really gain the independence that, they've sold to us.
Right.
19 years later, they are again at war with Britain, and they call this war, it's called the War of 1812, but historians actually refer to it sometimes as the Second War of Independence. So that should, give you a clue into, what's going on. What I believe happened at this point was that Britain really didn't care if the colonies wished to rule themselves, to a certain degree, as long as they retained control of the currency, the money supply.
Of course.
Okay. So it's they sort of probably agreed, yeah, okay, we've got enough going on, you can rule yourself, but as long as we control the money supply. And also most of the founding fathers and the people involved on the American side of the war were British, were English. So this is why I believe it's sort of, almost like a civil war, and one group of the English aristocracy against the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously mentioned money supply, so let's just again dive straight into this one. In your article, you make specific mention to the First Bank of the United States and its its crucial role in all of this. What's the relevance here?
So, the First Bank of the United States is established only 8 years after the War of Independence. So the war ends, 8 years later, they've got this central bank, right? Now, what's interesting, what I found, right? This is hilarious, right? So the initial funding was arranged through the sale of 10 million in stock, right? So you
Wow.
got 10
Okay.
million. 2 million of those shares are purchased by the US government. So 2
Right.
million.
Mm.
And then the remaining 8 million are available to the public, both to people in the United States and overseas. All
Okay.
right. So up to 80% of it could be in the hands of foreigners.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So not only was, most of the stock at this point bought up by European investors,
Of course.
primarily from England
Mm.
and the City of London, but what I found was the remaining shares, the remaining 20% belonging to the United States government was sold, right? Hear this,
Mm. Mm.
was sold only 1 year later from its establishment, so in 1802, to an English banker called Alexander Baring.
Well, the
Uh,
infamous Baring family, geez.
yeah,
Again, for the benefit of our listeners, I guess a quick history lesson on this family is required. So,
yeah,
essentially, from my understanding and reading, and obviously yours, they were a German English banking dynasty who founded Baring's Bank in London in around 1762. And by the 1800s, they weren't just bankers; they were essentially power brokers because obviously they controlled the currency. So they helped fund the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and this is when, around the time when the US bought a massive chunk of land from
yeah.
France and Europe, literally doubling its size. And the Barings basically handled the transaction. But as we know,
Yeah, see, there you
Phoenician,
go. On
that's
behalf
right.
of America,
That's
you've
right.
got these English bankers, wheeling and dealing, purchasing and selling,
Again, and this is
just
this is
who
this is
really
the
owns it?
exactly, and this is the fascinating thing for me, having read your article and obviously having discussions with you. But as we know, when the big wheels start turning, things obviously can go wrong, and they can go wrong pretty quickly. So, in around 1890, the family nearly collapsed, or the actual banking institution nearly collapsed after making some bad debts in Argentina, which we won't go into. That's just a
Ah,
historical fact.
yeah.
Now we jump ahead to 1995, which is so recent, and a lot of our listeners might remember this. There was a rogue trader named Nick Leeson who literally lost billions and basically sank the bank. And so, after more than 230 odd years, the institution, Barings Bank, was literally sold for £1. And so, you know what? That's how one of Britain's oldest banks vanished overnight.
Right. Interesting. I mean, there could be shenanigans there as well, where
Of course.
certain banks buy out other banks, and or money is laundered to other channels. You know what I mean? And then they
And
say,
we
"Oh,
know this,
so
yeah.
we're broke." You know what I
That's
mean? But the
right. That's right.
money's, yeah. So they do
Yeah.
these kind of things.
But the fact
But
that
getting,
it was purchased for £1,
yeah,
that's quite interesting.
that might be symbolic of
Sure,
something.
sure, sure.
Yeah. So going back to the article, the newly independent America want to create a central bank, and it's owned by English investors when you've just finished fighting a war with that nation. Okay, I mean,
Think about
so
it.
it's
Yeah.
like England after World War II had, went to war with Germany, and then a year later, their central bank is owned by, German investors.
Mm.
It's just be ridiculous.
Although there's you can use the connection of Operation Paperclip, which has the connection of the Nazis going to America. Anyway,
No,
that's
okay, you
that
bring
that
that up, and a lot of people get that wrong. You know what that is about?
okay.
Okay,
I'm glad.
people
I'm
think
glad you go.
no, because people think, oh, the Nazis infiltrated America. Okay, this is what happened. America got these prisoners of war, Germans, and they gave
Mm,
them a choice. You either come and work for us and NASA
mm,
because you're smart and
mm.
you've got, all this scientific knowledge that we need, or you go to, the concentration camp or
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 Ukraine
or
or
or,
somewhere. Yeah. Yeah.
or in prison, right?
Yes,
So if you're a German scientist, what are you going to do?
of course.
Of course. So, sorry, America did that, and they did
Mm,
it to benefit themselves. It wasn't
mm.
to benefit the Germans.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
So that was a
side. Okay.
side note. That's fine. Let's
Going
continue.
back, going back to, so yeah, the article. So then in 1811, which is where, nearing the end of the charter of this bank. It's refused by Congress. So that's 1811. All right. So then within a year, the United States again finds itself at war with Great Britain. So
Jeez.
the charter is refused. The rechart is refused, and within a year they're at war. Maybe a coincidence? I don't think so. Okay. So now this is what became known as the War of 1812, right? Or the Second War of Independence. If you read about it, the experts, say it was. This sounds ridiculous. This is what they say.
Yes.
Largely, it was waged largely over national honor, right?
Sure.
So, after 30 years, all these, a new nation, all these people, all of a sudden have developed this national honor. Yeah, right. Maritime rights, fishing rights, where you're allowed to fish, and the United States' desire to take, parts of Canada.
Mm.
That's how it's sold. This is what the war's about, right? And during this war, the British even captured and burnt the White House, the Capitol,
Oh,
right? They burnt
okay.
the Capitol in Washington and other
Yeah.
government buildings.
Oh,
So that to me is just a real show of strength. Like if you mess with us, we can actually burn down your capital. I mean, to
of
take a
course.
capital in a
Yeah.
war is quite significant.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
It's a big deal. It's usually the last place that they should take, but
Mm.
they took it on quite early on in the war. So then this war ends in 1815. And in 1816, again, within a year, America erects the second bank of the United States.
Wow.
Okay. And this bank would operate for 20 years from 1816 to 1836. So, I mean, if you just look at the dates, when the bank expires and then when the new bank is chartered, and then it all corresponds with the wars, with the conflict. So, my reading of events is that these wars were a result of the bank's
Well,
charter.
okay. So let's continue moving along this timeline. In your article, you write that in around 1832, and at the time, President Andrew Jackson, who was the seventh president of the US, he served two terms from 1829 to 1837. He vetoed a bill by Congress to reauthorize the second bank, and he argued that it was a corrupt and elitist institution. So he was obviously awake at the time, and he knew that something was
Yeah,
not
he's
right.
another one who knew
Yeah.
what was going on.
So what does he do? He proceeds to shut down the second bank. And as a side note, people should know that his face is actually on the US $20 note. So he decides to shut down this second bank.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
So, so he ends the bank for good, right?
Mm.
The Bank of United States, and he became the only president in American history, right, to pay off the national debt. So
Wow.
that tells you all you need to know about central banking and its real purpose. All
Of
right, it's to
course.
get your country into debt.
Of course.
So, yeah, exactly. He knew this, so he shut it down, and he's the only one to ever pay off the national debt. And he also survived an assassination attempt by English-born, right, Richard Lawrence, when
Yes.
both of his pistols misfired. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was, and I love this story. So
Mm.
Jackson was in his late 60s, early 70s at the time, and he apparently, from all historical records, was, he obviously had a cane. And when this Richard Lawrence guy attempted to assassinate him, he literally jumped at him and started beating him with his cane. And involved in this scuffle was, the now famous Davy Crockett. They restrained this guy, and as you've stated in your research, that both pistols were tested, and they both worked perfectly. So everyone thought it was a freak coincidence, or some call it even divine intervention. But anyway, Jackson at the time didn't buy it. He believed that this Lawrence guy didn't act alone, and suspected some sort of political conspiracy. Nothing was ever proven, obviously.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, let's continue.
Well, yeah, the link there to England again is because, he was English born, and
Yeah,
which people miss. But
they
as
do.
I'm trying to tell in this article, that it's all connected to the English aristocracy. So they're all involved with the central banking institution, and again, if a president is assassinated or is targeted for assassination, there's got to be a really good reason, and the reason usually is to do with money. you
Of
know,
course. Yeah.
you go up against the bankers, then you're in serious trouble, basically.
That's right. And, we can obviously state the most obvious assassination of a US president, but that has other conspiracy theories attached to it.
Do you want to go
Again,
there? No, let's not go
no, no,
there.
no. That's
That's
for
another
another
40 minute
ten
discussion.
podcasts, I think. You mention in your article an interesting book. And again, your article, the thing I love about your articles is that it tells a story in a quite specific timeline, and it literally is
Yeah,
like
chronological
reading.
order.
It's
Yeah,
like reading a
I'm
story.
following the order. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'm following, and I do this with all my or most of my articles. I'm following the time period. So I follow the dates closely and what's happening around that time period.
Mm.
And if you do that, they usually link up, and then
Yeah.
you can find the persons or the nations, whatever, behind the events, and they all fit in to tell this story, and we get to, the end in a moment, but
Well,
it all fits in.
and this is why I love it, because it's like it is like reading a story, and that's you're on this
Mm.
adventure, and
Yeah.
if you go back to these, your very first article, again, it all ties back to obviously what is the Phoenicians, etc.,
Mm.
which is just fascinating. Nevertheless, you mentioned in your article an interesting book, which I did a little bit of research, but I won't go into it. It's called The Present Attempt to Dissolve the American Union, a British Aristocratic Plot.
Yeah, I mean, I came across this book by chance, and it's brilliant. It's a very small book. I think maybe 90 pages or something like that. But this book reveals quite a bit. It reveals England's desires and plans for the upcoming American Civil War. So by as early as 1856, the British aristocracy were concerned with America's growing commercial, political, and military power. So remember, at this time, it had been about 30 years since. So England lost control of the money supply in America because of the actions of Andrew Jackson. So, at this period, they've lost control. So America's sort of able to get rid of their national debt, grow their economy, grow politically, grow their military. They're becoming strong and they're becoming noticed by the European powers and especially England. England historically had this tactic, let's put it right, that would one of the reasons they stayed in power for so long, right? They were the main power of Europe and the world for so long is they applied this tactic where they would, if a nation was up and coming, and they felt that this nation was going to become a threat to their trade or to their military, what they would do is they'll make alliances with smaller other nations to gang up on this one and take it down. So they did that with Spain. They did that with France, with Napoleon. They got the coalition of all of Europe to go against France. They did the same with Germany in World War One and World War Two. No one is allowed to have colonies. They're allowed, but no one else is allowed to have colonies. No one else is allowed to have, a strong military. No one else is allowed to have a strong navy. Very important.
Yeah, we call that bullying in today's
Yeah,
terms.
so they use this tactic where they, will gang up, get other nations involved to gang up on whoever's at the up and coming power. It's a tactic that they've employed for hundreds of years.
Of course.
Okay, so we're going back to the article. So in this book, it was revealed, right, that the English aristocracy were prepared to abolish slavery throughout their empire and to take a financial hit.
Mm,
So, for the greater good. So that they were prepared to do this, not because they cared
of course.
about, the well-being of mankind and black slaves or white slaves. And for them, they saw the bigger picture, right? And to them, their greatest threat was America at this point. So this is the plan that they came up with to abolish slavery, because slavery at that time was quite important to the American colonies,
Yeah.
okay, especially in the South. So they came up with this plan that if they abolished slavery throughout their empire, they'll take the financial hit early on, and then they'll promote anti-slavery propaganda in America. And this would create an anti-slavery sentiment, right, in the United States, and create this discord between the North and the South.
Yeah.
A few years later, then in 1861, this we have the American Civil War. So
Of
it's
course.
taken, it was like a 5-year plan for them to implement this thing.
Gee.
Yeah,
Okay, so my question is,
yeah.
how exactly was Great Britain involved in the American Civil War?
Okay, so initially, like most people would think that they had little to no involvement. Great Britain's presence in the American Civil War is not really noted. It's
Mm.
not, they didn't have troops on the ground basically, so
Yeah.
you're not going to notice that, right? And as a side, also, people need to know that the American Civil War did involve a lot of nations around the world.
Oh, okay.
Like a lot of mercenaries were brought in from a lot from Germany.
Mm.
The Papal States had troops there.
See, that's
You
not
know,
widely reported in, I
no, it's
guess,
not.
the
Irish
mainstream historical books. There.
brigades,
Oh, wow. Okay.
Irish brigades. There were a lot of mercenaries, deployed
Sure.
in that war. So what happened was Great Britain became the main supporter of the Confederacy of the South in both finance and arms, right? And I go through these in the article in greater depth. And most of these were London-based companies.
Mm.
Okay, so the City of London again is involved
Of
with
course.
financing and supplying arms to the Confederacy, right?
Mm.
Now, this also caused a little bit of problems between the North and England. And at one point, America almost declared war on England again because of this event, because they noticed that Great Britain was getting involved on the Confederate side. I think I put that in the article, just a little paragraph or two on that. There's also another story that I don't get into in the article, but it involves the Russian Federation and the American Civil War. When it takes off, apparently we have troops. You have French troops in Mexico amassing on the border there, trying to get, ready to get involved. Then you've got British troops amassing on the Canadian American border there as well, prepared to, come in if required. And apparently the story goes that, the Tsar of Russia noticed this and came to the conclusion that, okay, the European states are about to take America apart, to split it up and take the spoils basically after the Civil War. And he said, no, you're not going to do this. And what he did was he sent his navy into, I think it was New York, and stationed his fleet or part of his fleet there as a deterrent to say to, the European powers that if you intervene, I'm going to intervene on the side of the North.
Mm.
So then this would have exploded into a world war. So that's just a bit of a side. You can look into that. There's a story there
Sure.
on that. So going back to the article, at the end of the war, America was not split apart, and this was what I believe America had hoped would happen,
Mm.
right? So, they had hoped that the Civil War will split America into, a South and a North, and it could easily be taken apart that way and controlled. But, America was devastated and put the government in great debt. I read, and again, the sources are in the article, that Great Britain became the main purchaser of American United States bonds, railway stocks,
Mm.
securities, and other assets, and they bought them on the cheap,
Yeah.
very reduced price. So this is in now the money men, again, the bankers. Whenever there's a war,
Mm.
as soon as the war's finished, they come in and buy up everything. They buy up all the assets. Now, something similar happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, where with the collapse, then you've got all these oligarchs coming in and buying the gas and the
Yeah.
all
All the
the
natural
resources.
resources. Yeah.
Exactly. All the national resources, banks, they buy it up. It's almost like deals are happening
Mm.
behind the scenes before any of this stuff hits the mainstream.
Mm.
It's already, these vultures come in and pick it all apart, And there was that the manager of Chelsea Football Club,
Abramovich.
he did that. He was given, he bought up
That's right.
the Russian
That's right.
gas resources on the cheap. as soon as the you know,
And he's one of the true oligarchs out of Russia. But I think
yeah,
that, again, that's another story because there's a lot
yeah,
involved, a lot of information. So you're saying at the end of the war, where it just literally devastated the United States, in your article you say that the English bankers then literally moved in like vultures and they
yeah.
introduced the Federal Reserve. Is that right?
Well, no, so they bought up a lot of the assets, a lot of the securities, a lot of the stocks, a lot of the banks. So they
Mm,
own the banks at that point, all right? The American banks,
right.
all right? So what happens here is by now the US is without any sort of central bank since, 1836, right? So that's what, 30 years.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So now what we find is deliberate actions by the American banks controlled by London. Okay. So they're taking their orders from London. Now, these American banks caused a series of economic depressions, all right,
Yeah.
which
No,
are called,
no surprises
yeah,
there. Yep.
yeah, financial panics. So there's one in, there's a series of these, in short succession. So there's one just after the end of the war. There's one in 1873. 1893 and 1907. And with that one in 1873, I don't get into the this in the article because that's a very important one, and that's one I want to do another dedicated post on. This is when they demonetize silver, which is very important because silver is considered the people's money,
Of
where
course.
gold is the bullion of the bankers and the sovereigns, money of the kings, where silver is the money of the people.
Yeah.
So they demonetize it, so you're not allowed to, mine for silver and bring it in and get it, minted basically. So
Sure. Sure.
out of that comes the story of the Wizard of Oz, actually.
Yeah.
Out
Follow
of
the
that
yellow brick
event.
road. Follow the
Yeah.
gold. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's another whole
Yep.
topic, but it's fascinating, and I've
I
got to
would
do
love
a
I would
post on
love
it.
to have a chat about that,
Yeah,
specifically about
yeah,
that movie and
yeah,
its
yeah,
underlying meaning or message. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so the ultimate plan was for the bankers to cause these depressions was to coerce Congress into giving them a private central bank so it can control the currency because it
Mm.
was saying that, oh, it's not stable, we need to come in, we need to control it. You guys don't know what you're doing.
Sure.
The
Sure.
same old story, all right, okay.
Can we focus on perhaps the panic of 1893, the financial panic of 1893? Because you do mention this. There was a document that was placed in the hands of the members of Congress by these bankers.
Yeah, that's
Part
a brilliant thing that I found in a book. I forgot the name of it now, but it's in the article. But yeah,
yeah.
that just blew it apart. That just
Let's entertain our listening audience. And for the benefit of this discussion, I'm going to read an excerpt of what you've written in your article.
mm,
A national bank is absolutely necessary for the future financial safety of the country. Under present conditions, there is no elasticity to our currency. It is certainly preferable to have a great national bank founded on almost exactly the lines of the Bank of England, thus taking financial questions and management entirely out of the influence of politics, because the government of the great National Bank of England is entirely in the hands of the greatest businessmen of the country who have no interest whatever in politics except as citizens. Interesting. I know it is, yes.
yeah, that just I was laughing so loudly when I first read that, and I mean, they tell you quite clearly there who's involved? They say almost exactly the lines of the Bank of England. So, they want to found this Federal Reserve as an arm of the Bank of England, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
The greatest businessmen of the country.
yeah.
So, merchants, they have no interest whatsoever in politics.
Of
They
course.
only care, their only care is for the citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You just got to laugh. So this is a letter that was given to members of Congress to convince them that us, lovely businessmen,
Businessmen, yeah,
merchants,
that's right.
we only
We only
care
care
for
about the
the
citizens.
we only care for the citizens. We want
Oh,
to we want
jeez.
we want to create a great national bank along the lines of the National Bank of England, in your lovely country because we only care and we're not interested in politics. You can still run the government as you please,
Sure.
and that goes back to that quote from Rothschild that, you mentioned at the very
Give me
beginning.
control of a nation's money supply, and I care not what makes its laws.
Exactly. So the panic of 1907 is the one that finally convinced Congress to accept the creation of the Federal Reserve, and it was established in 1913.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. This discussion has been great. We are now at a point where we have to wrap it up. Even though I want to talk for hours on end. So thank you, Phoenician Hunter. But before we do sign off, do you have any final thoughts just to close things out?
Yeah, so Great Britain cannot subdue America through the use of force. So then it thought that it would do so by commerce, and this is a practice that it's done elsewhere too.
Mm,
Great Britain, although it has fought many wars, and I've read somewhere probably the most of any nation in history, it doesn't always conduct warfare by physical means. It can do it financially, economically, trade, and sometimes it goes down that route rather than use brute force. So this is what's happened here. They tried and tried again with the first bank, the second bank, and once they don't get the bank, that's when war comes in, and then they went back to the old tricks with the panics and the financial collapse, and then they convinced the government that way. So that's what's happened here,
mm,
and so their objective was finally realized with the Federal Reserve, and this is the beginning of, and they state this themselves, a new order of the ages.
mm.
Okay, this is
Good.
their new venture. So the Great Seal of the United States was introduced on the reverse of the $1 bill in 1935 by the Federal Reserve. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
the seal contains, the Latin phrase "out of many one."
Mm.
It also says, "He has favored our undertakings." I'm not giving you the Latin; I'm giving you the
Of
translation.
course, yeah, yeah.
and and it also states a new order of the ages. So out of many one, they control out of many nations. They can, the one controls all. God has favored their undertakings.
Mm.
This undertaking, okay, is favored by God. You got God's favor, right? God's approval. The merchants always seek that too. They're not godless and satanic as people think.
Sure.
And so this is the beginning of what they call the new order of the ages, okay? This is why you have the great power struggle, or have had, between the old world of Rome under the Pope, which is considered, right? So Rome was considered the old world order, okay? So, when people talk about the new world order and they say, I hear this a lot, it's the Jesuits, it's the Vatican, it's Rome. They are considered the old world power, okay? They were taken over, upseated by England and America, okay? And they represent the new world order. They tell you, it's stated on their seals, in their symbols.
Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is the a new order of the ages, and I think a lot of people know about that. Well, look, as always, great work, Phoenician Hunter. Fascinating work, in fact. So, what's my big takeaway from today's episode? Well, the fight for American independence wasn't just about war and flags. It was clearly about money, as you've stated. Even after 1776, British influence didn't disappear. It kind of just, let's call it changing forms. And the control of America's money supply was slowly handed back to the British and European banking interests, first through, as you've mentioned, and as you write in your article, the first Bank of the United States, and finally 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, the central bank not run by government but by private enterprise. So, and this is a fact that millions even today still don't understand. So for me, when
Yeah,
people say Britain regained America, I don't think they're talking about soldiers. I think they're talking about money. If you control
yeah,
the money,
and
you don't need to control the government.
yeah, and it's interesting also that up until World War One, the general public in America viewed England, rightly so, as their enemy.
Yeah.
They went to war with them more than once. They were aware, especially the government, were aware of their shenanigans during the Civil War, that, England was not on their side. They did not have the interest of the American people, at heart. See, today, a lot of Americans, would say, oh, Britain is it's almost like our brother nation,
Yeah.
it's our ally. This all started with propaganda during, just before and during the First World War,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Because Britain needed American military might and arms to help them win that war. And it's no different than what Israel does today with America.
Yeah.
It's created this fake ally where, oh, we're your friends, we're your greatest. I think they even say we're your greatest ally and all
Mm.
this. And in reality, they couldn't care less. They just need your body there,
Yeah.
your body on the line for them,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And it's no different. England did this before. Today you see it with Israel, but in the
Yeah.
past it was Great Britain. And then, like I said, a lot of propaganda. I mean, at that point of World War One, most of the biggest ethnic group in America were German.
Mm.
In America were Germans.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they had no interest to go and fight against Germans for the benefit of Great Britain. So there was a lot of propaganda, and then there was a couple of false flag events there that brought them into the war. A lot of lobbying with the government, and then history tells us that America willingly went to war to help the Allies,
Mm.
World One and World War Two, and this propaganda has continued since then that Great Britain is the greatest ally of America. And I'm not talking about the people here because obviously Americans have a cultural attachment to England. That's correct, and that rightly so. But I'm talking about the governments here. The government of Great Britain has never considered America. They viewed them as a threat and an enemy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's their game, I suppose. That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Well, look, thanks again. I encourage listeners to access your articles on your Substack channel, where a good selection of them fall under your free subscription. And they can go to phoenicianhunter.substack.com to read more. Again, thanks for your insights, Phoenician Hunter.
No problem. Thank you for your time.
And for our listeners, remember to subscribe to Phoenician Hunter's Substack channel and our YouTube channel at On Air Podcasts 2025, all hyphenated, to listen to our last 21 episodes. And remember, our YouTube podcasts are absolutely free to subscribers. So until next episode, keep asking questions, keep digging. This is Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer signing off.